What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the freaking channel. Once again, we're going to review another iPhone. I think today I'm reviewing two of them, the iPhone SE and then another one. I don't know which one I'm going to do yet. But right now we're going to look at the iPhone SE and see how it holds up in 2019, how it's going to hold up later on this year. And I'll try to break down a rubric and criteria of what this phone is and whether it's still good or whatever. You guys will basically understand if you should buy this phone in 2019, if you should still keep it or whatever the case is, okay? Now, just like a lot of the other iPhones that I've covered throughout this year already, I've covered several of them. A lot has changed within last year, so not every year do we see like a humongous change with them, but this one in this specific year gap, there's been a ton of changes. So if you've already seen my other videos that I just talked about, like the iPhone 6 video or the iPhone 6s Plus in 2019, you can go ahead and skip like the next 45 seconds because it's pretty much a repeat of what I repeated in that intro of that video. But before going forward, I kind of want to take a step back and look at this phone in a bird's eye view. So this phone obviously came out in 2016. It was pretty much in between the gap of the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 6s. So this is why I hope an iPhone SE2 will be coming in this year, actually in June, but that's besides the point. Last year when I actually made that iPhone SE video in 2018, we were on iOS 11, which wasn't really that stable. There were a lot of bugs and problems with it. But strangely enough, I found that the iPhone SE was still fairly stable for running a software that wasn't even that good. And since then, I did install almost every single iOS version on it, and I've done a thorough videos on almost every single version as well. And I found that the stability was like here nor there. It wasn't really stable on any iPhone iOS 11, but midway through 2018 we actually got a new updated version of iOS, which was iOS 12, and that actually fixed out a lot of the bugs that iOS 11 had. It wasn't perfect, iOS 12 still has a lot of problems, but it's definitely way less than iOS 11, so that's definitely a solid thing. And it also added a lot of features within iOS like group FaceTime, group notifications, all those different things. So this phone, in my opinion, and a lot of the other iPhones, are a lot better this year than they were last year, which is crazy because you'd think as a phone progresses and gets older, it's not worth it as much, but because iOS 11 just wasn't that good, the newer version of iOS actually helped it out a lot. So that's definitely a good thing, and that's definitely proof of how important software is for a phone, so hopefully someone from the Android department in the Android world goes ahead and starts updating their phones as much too. But and also humongous update from last year, Apple stopped selling the iPhone SE in the stores. They actually stopped selling the 6s and the 6s Plus as well, so you can't go to the Apple stores and buy these things anymore, which really does suck. But you can always go ahead and just go buy them in the used market, go buy them from Craigslist, go buy them from eBay. So that's always an option, but you cannot go to the store, you cannot go to the Apple store and buy them from there anymore, which is unfortunate and really sad. I get emotional every time I think about it, but it is what it is. So that pretty much brings us to now. So looking around the body, I'm sure you've seen an iPhone SE at some point, either this or the iPhone 5s. They all pretty much share the same body. Even the iPhone 5, obviously the iPhone SE has a fingerprint sensor, but this body is still, in my opinion, holds up. It doesn't feel cheap. It does have a little bit of glass on the back, on the top and the bottom, and when I'm holding this phone, like I've seen a lot of these go for like $99, sometimes even less than that, and I really think that this phone is definitely worth more than that. It doesn't feel cheap. It definitely feels premium. So that's kind of a little bit about how it's held up. Even though we're kind of going in this like bezel-less trend, I think this phone definitely has a special place in like the whole phone lineup. It does have a 4-inch screen up front. It's not that bad. The PPI is the exact same as the iPhone XR, but it is a smaller screen, so it's not as pixelated, but it's definitely not amazing. I'll kind of say that, this phone isn't perfect. It does have an IPS panel. It's not an OLED panel, so the blacks aren't going to look as dark and things like that. But you know what? If you're spending, this much on a phone, you're probably not expecting, the greatest amount of features or anything like that. It does have a headphone jack on the bottom as well. And overall, man, the body is what makes it or breaks it for you. Either you like the body, you like the smaller design, or you don't. So that's one thing you kind of have to ask yourself and consider going forward. Do you like the smaller design phones or do you like the bigger design phones? And the phone is still supported with software, so it's not outdated yet. So this is one of the few software supported phones that are still on the market today. So kind of have to consider that. Now, turning it on, we have iOS 12.1.2, which is the latest version right now. Obviously, if you're watching this later, there's probably iOS 12.3 or like iOS 13 or even whatever's next. But right now, it does have iOS 12 on it. And overall, in my opinion, iOS 12 has been solid with the iPhone SE. On a lot of other iPhones, it's been like hit or miss. I guess they never really miss on, but it was kind of all over the place. But with this phone, I found iOS 12 to be very, very solid. I tested it thoroughly. Even with other iPhones, I compare the speeds and everything, and it really isn't that bad at all. And kind of going forward with the stability and just the support of this phone is definitely going to get the rest of iOS 12. And after that, it's going to get iOS 13 as well, in my opinion. But I think it's going to stop there. I don't think it's going to go any further after that. Now, I really hope I'm wrong. I hope it does get iOS 14. But relatively speaking, if the iPhone 6s and the iPhone SE, they do share a lot of the same specs. If the iPhone 6s stops at iOS 13, I'm assuming the iPhone SE is also going to stop in iOS 13. Now, a lot of people do say because the iPhone SE was released after it, there's a possibility that it's going to get the same software versions as the iPhone 7, but I don't really think so. And mostly that has to do with the same specs that the iPhone 6s and the iPhone SE share. But like I said, I hope I'm wrong. I hope the iPhone SE continues getting support. But in terms of performance, I think everything is solid here too. I really recommended the iPhone 6s last year, and even this year, the same thing with the 6s Plus. I mention them all the time and I bring them up as much as I can because they're very, very cheap iPhones that are still supported and they're very good in speed. And this phone is no exception. In terms of the hardware inside, it has 2 gigs of RAM and a dual-core processor clocked at 1.84 gigs. And it also has the Apple A9 chip as well. So in terms of that, I mean, you would think like, oh, it only has 2 gigs. At the Apple A9, it's 2 years, 3 years old. It's not good, this and that. I'm telling you right now, I compare this phone to a ton of iPhones just like a couple months ago, even when after iOS 12 was released and everything. And I found that the newer iPhones may obviously be a little bit faster here and there, but overall, the iPhone SE can definitely still handle its own. It just feels like when I'm swiping through the pages and everything, it's just so fluid and it doesn't feel cheap and it doesn't feel slow and it just feels like it's a solid performing phone. I don't think to myself, oh man, this phone is super slow. I don't think that to myself at all when I'm holding it. So I think that this phone is definitely solid in terms of performance. Now, continuing on with the gaming of it, I think it's also pretty good as well. You know, casual games work fine, Temple Run, whatever you're going to do with it obviously is going to work fine. Heavier games also work fine too, but again, there might be some skipped frames here and there. Don't expect perfect performance, but it's going to be very, very respectable. But I think the performance of this phone not only has a lot to do with the hardware inside, the internals, the A9 chip, the 2 gigs RAM, but I think it has a lot to do with the screen itself. Because it's a lower resolution, it has less pixels to push overall, and I think that has a lot to do with the performance of this phone. So overall, I think the performance is very, very good. Obviously, it's not as good as like the iPhone XS or XS Max, but as long as you're not comparing them side by side, I really don't think you're going to even notice a difference, honestly. Now moving on to the cameras, we have a 12 megapixel camera on the back, and overall the back camera is fairly solid as well. I use that word all the time, but I like the back camera on this. I'm not too picky about the camera sensors, you know, I don't really care too much about the cameras. As long as it even takes a photo, that's all I care about. I'll definitely say that the photos that it takes are definitely on the better side. I've said the same thing with the iPhone 6s as well, and they actually do share the same components, the same camera sensors, but the iPhone SE camera does lack some features that you do get on newer iPhones like portrait mode and the telephoto lens, which allows you to zoom in a lot more. But if your usage is pretty basic, then this is perfectly fine. You know, you can shoot 1080p videos at up to 120 frames per second, 4K videos, and really as a basic camera, that's really all you need if you think about it. But one thing I don't like is the front camera. It's 1.2 megapixels, and like I said, it's okay. It will get the job done. It does take selfie photos, whatever, but it's definitely a little bit grainy, and you can tell that it's not as good. If you're in kind of somewhat shady conditions, you're going to notice that the camera isn't as good in my opinion, but it is what it is. Overall, I think the camera sensors, if you're for what you're paying for this price and how old this phone is, I think the front and back cameras when combined are definitely decent cameras. So the camera on this phone definitely has my thumbs up. Now, the battery life is one of those things that is super crazy to me because when I was on iOS 11, I found that the battery life wasn't even that bad. But then when iOS 12, I noticed that all my iPhones pretty much went down in battery life. It really wasn't that great in battery life on my iPhones, and I didn't know what that was. Maybe because of the new features and the bug fixes and all that stuff. But when I put iOS 12 on my iPhone SE, I'm telling you right now, my iPhone SE lasted so much longer than all my other iPhones on standby, and I think the battery life definitely has increased on iOS 12 on my iPhone SE specifically. So that is a humongous difference from last year. So it's pretty crazy that a phone can just get a software update and just make the battery life that much better in my specific case. Again, my battery life health is at 100%. So if you're on like a really old iPhone SE with horrible battery health, then it doesn't really matter. You have to get that changed. But in my opinion, the battery life on this thing is still very, very solid. You could probably get a whole day out of it. On my usage, I could definitely, but if you're a heavier user, you might want to change your usage up a little bit if you're planning on get it, or just bring a charge with you or whatever. But I think that the battery life on this thing is still a pro, so I'll definitely leave it at that. Now, some other notable things to note: it doesn't have Touch ID 2, it only has Touch ID 1. Not that big of a deal though, it still works perfectly fine, and I would rather have a fingerprint sensor than the face unlock sensor, so that's kind of what it is. Now, the size is a make it or break it for you. Like I stated earlier, if you like a bigger phone, then you should go with a bigger phone. But if you like a smaller phone, this is definitely a solid option in my opinion. Now there's also no water resistance, which does kind of suck, but it is what it is. You can't really change anything about that. There's no force touch either, so this has a lot to do with the iPhone XR as well. Both these phones do not support force touch, and they're still supported, so I'll just kind of leave it at that as well. Now another huge thing, parts to repair this phone are fairly cheap, so if you break the screen or you break the battery or whatever the case is, you can go and fix it yourself, and that's pretty important to note, especially when you're getting used devices. You want to know the repairability of that phone, and it's not going to be too expensive, and it's not even that hard to take apart this phone and fix something if it's broken, so that's definitely a humongous pro as well. So to answer the question, is the iPhone SE still worth it in 2019? I'm going to say absolutely 100% this phone is still worth it. You know, they're still cheap and they still have quite a bit of life left in them. You know, obviously it's going to, like I said, not only in software, but in hardware as well. I don't see this phone being slow. I don't think this phone has gotten slower over the time. I think this phone has only gotten faster, and I always flip between the iPhone 6s being the best priced iPhone or the iPhone SE being the best priced iPhone. And sometimes I do flip flop, but regardless, since this last year, the pricing of this phone is still very, very good. Even since last year, these things were selling in the used market around the $150 price mark, and even that wasn't even that bad of a price. But now I've actually seen a lot of them being sold for less than $100, even unlocked versions for less than $100. So I think for that price, it's a very, very good option, and the fact that it's still supported is super awesome. So if you want to get them used, obviously you can find them on eBay and Craigslist and all those places, but what I would recommend is getting them certified or refurbished, so you can actually get a warranty with it, and it's usually a lot safer that way as well. So I'll leave a link to the cheapest one I find on Amazon. I would highly recommend you ordering from there. Not only do you get a warranty and all that stuff most of the time, but you also help support the channel as well, so we can do more videos like this and giveaways and all those things. So I'll leave a link to an iPhone SE in the description below, but that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out, but more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.